So tonight I'm very well pleased to welcome the Superintendent of Blaine School District, Ron Spanjer. He holds a doctorate in education and has 35 years of work experience in Washington Public Schools, 30 in school administration. Ron has held the position of Superintendent in Blaine for the past 12 years. Accompanying Ron is Amber Porter, Blaine School District's Executive Director of Finance and Operations, a position she's held for 8 years. Prior to that, she worked for the State Auditor's Office. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming. I think this is a good time to hear from the school district since there's something coming up on the ballot, and there's something people have noticed in the recent tax bills. And I'm just going to let you give whatever overview you'd like to give of how things work and what's going on in the school district, and then open it up to questions.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the invitation. It's always great to be in Point Roberts, and really proud of the school here and the things that are happening at Point Roberts Primary School. For my first 8 or so years, I had the privilege of actually supervising there, and so probably spend a bit more time there than I do now, but it's a special place. So those of you who have an opportunity to either have children go through with grandchildren or work and volunteer in that environment know that it's a very, very unique environment in the context of public education in the state of Washington, and particularly in the Blaine School District. There are really 3 parts I'd like to address with Amber's support this evening, and then certainly we want to leave time for questions, but as you have questions and would like to jump in, that's fine as well. So I'd like to start with just a brief sort of contextual overview of the Blaine School District, size of the district, and some of the program priorities. I won't spend a lot of time on that. I know that it's not probably technically why you're here, but I think it helps to give sort of an underlayment, if you will, of the work that we do each day on behalf of close to 2,200 kids across Point Roberts, Blaine, and Birch Bay. This is a very broad geographical district in large part because of our connection with Point Roberts. And yet, one of the things we're frequently reminded of is Point Whitehorn's at the southern, southwestern tip of the district, and that's about as distant from the core geographically and mileage-wise as Point Roberts is. So we cover a lot of terrain and also a fair amount of diversity in terms of economy and in terms of demographics and our population and property values. I'm sure you're all very much aware that approximately through the years, 28% of our property valuation lies with British Petroleum, BP Cherry Point. So when we look at some of the comparative school-based tax rates across Whatcom County, and I'm not really here to pitch that tonight, but just a reference point in that is we know that we leverage a reasonable amount of property tax from BP Cherry Point. And well, in a year when the state is levying their McCleary tax, that doesn't seem very reassuring that BP is paying a big share of all of this. I think that that's just a context piece that, again, is unique to the Blaine School District overall to have a refinery operation of that size in the district. 2,200 students, that number really, in my dozen years in the school district, hasn't fluctuated much. It's pretty much remained constant in service to kids preschool through 12th grade. Early on in 2002, I came in 2006, and that 2002-2005 time frame with 9/11 and border security and homeland security rapidly escalating. The district did see a surge in student population for a long period of time. Blaine School District was hovering right around 12 to 1,500 students. So it jumped pretty dramatically in a relatively short period of time, and a lot of that had to do with border security and families that were moving to Blaine. to be employed by the federal government. And I'm sure that to some degree that's true of Point Roberts as well, at least it would have been at that time. So we remain relatively constant in enrollment. What's unique about Blaine is that generally speaking, roughly 97% or so, maybe 98% of our students are served right directly on one common campus. So we have 4 schools on one campus. That provides a lot of efficiency, if you will, economy of scale, in that we don't, other than Point Roberts, we don't have to bus students to multiple locations or multiple schools. We don't have food service operations spread out across the school district. Custodial services are primarily facilitated directly from the main campus. Sue and Anita support that here at Point Roberts, but in general, the lion's share of custodial and maintenance work happens out of the main campus. And as a result of that efficiency, there are programs in place on our campus and services in place on our campus that wouldn't necessarily, or in the district, that wouldn't necessarily be consistent with a district our size. I just did a presentation last week out at Semiano, and one of the points of emphasis were the number of advanced placement courses and courses that provide for college credit in the high school classroom that we're offering. We have close to 50% of our kids at the high school in some capacity enrolling in one or more courses where they can earn college credit at the high school. To get those teachers certified and to support college level credit for those kids is in part doable for a district the size of Blaine because, again, we have that economy of having all our schools closer together, so services are provided more efficiently. So that's just one example. We have very extensive athletic and activity programs and music programs and visual arts and a very comprehensive drama program. You know, the other districts that I've worked in over that 35-year period really don't hold a candle to the number of things that we're providing for our students in the Blaine School District. And in large part, or in part, that's been doable not just because of the size of the district, but because of our long-standing, the state's way back, probably into the early 70s, excuse me, if not further back, long-standing opportunity in Blaine to maximize maintenance and operation levy collections at the higher level than other districts would be able to. And in part that's supported by the relatively lower school taxation level that's supported again by BP, British Petroleum, Cherry Point. So again, many programs. We don't cut students in athletic programs at the high school or middle school level, and we try to maintain as many programs as necessary to support those students. Bellingham, for example, runs their athletic program through a community-based resource, and Blaine has a district-supported program. Thank you, Mark. So, with that, one of the things that I would like to do is talk a little bit about the funding structure in the Blaine School District, and maybe Mark could help with this. Amber put together a summary that I'll have her speak to. That'd be great if you wouldn't mind. And what we want to do is give folks an opportunity to look at generally categories of expenditure. One of the things when Mark contacted me last week, one of the things he asked about for reference was some interest in, okay, so in the 16-17 school year, we budgeted to spend just over $27.5 million in the Blaine School District. This year that number is closer to $30 million. We saw nearly a 10% increase in that level. So let's speak to that a bit, not only why the increase over the last year, but when you look at a school district, how are dollars spent? How are your tax dollars spent? And what percentage of those dollars come from the state, from the federal government, and then historically from the local level levy? And I say historically because the state's changed that whole formula. And I want to talk a bit about that in McCleary as well. So, Amber, I'll let you jump in here and explain what's on this page, if you would.
Sure. So the top of this page shows 16-17 actual expenditure figures for the Blaine School District and then for the county as a whole. So all 7 districts are shown under the county column for those dollar figures. The percentages are simply the amount of personnel as a portion of the entire amount spent in the Blaine School District, which would be 84.6%, supplies and fuel costs as a percentage of the total. And then we show the same for the county. And so if you compare how Blaine School District spends dollars compared to the county as a whole, we're similar in many ways. School districts tend to spend most of their dollars on personnel because we're providing programs for students. Not as much is spent on the supplies, food, fuel, column, materials, books. That would all fall under that next line. That's only about 4.3% of what we spend dollars on. Services, utilities, for instance, insurance costs, software. We have a large student management software program, accounting programs, professional services are included in this, legal, audit, also some services for students directly, teaching services, could be medical type services that are required for certain students or placement programs if they are placed into a separate setting. So there are certainly more dollars spent in that category than there are in the supplies category, 9.4%. The Blaine School District travels probably a little bit more than the average district in the county. We have a grant that supports a lot of conferences for teachers that are studying individual advancement. We call it AVID, and there is a federal grant that we've received that supports that cost. That is fairly unique to our district. And then capital outlay, if I were to look at any district in a given year, this one is going to go up and down quite a bit depending on the availability of dollars that were used to either purchase computers, a large acquisition of computers, or do some smaller renovations. The general fund of the school district is not very well set up to take on large capital projects. It's not. The state doesn't intend apportionment dollars to be directed in that capacity. We have to apply for special permission if we were to move any of those dollars over to our capital projects fund. Our capital projects fund is a separate fund. It's not shown here, but that's the fund where we would build buildings, do a major system overhaul, purchase any land, perform any improvements. Dollars that typically go in that fund would include bond proceeds or capital levy proceeds. Any kind of overview questions, kind of high level? Go ahead.
So was that about 2,000 students? Is that what you said?
2,200.
So what's that, about 10, a little over 10, 11,000 a student? I'm sure that's not quite the way to break it down.
Right, and it's
per
going
year.
to depend on some other factors like the experience and education level of your teaching staff. That will be one of the factors that determines that. And I think that we find that the largest driver of revenues in the school district is the number of students. And that's true for the state portion of dollars as well as for the local property taxes that go into the general fund.
So if you had to break it down by students, for 11,000 per student per year.
$12,272.73.
Is that a useful way of looking at education costs, or if not,
I don't tend to, largely because some of these expenditures are tied to federal programs, which would be targeted often at certain student groups. There are federal grants for just special education. So there's one factor there is the percentage of your students qualifying for additional services in special education, or maybe Title I, which is a remedial type of educational program. Some years, there's an impact based on the level of free and reduced lunch students in the district. Blaine School District has about 50% free and reduced lunch, and in some years they have used that to generate additional funds to lower class sizes, but that's sort of tapering out. But just because of some of those types of programs, transportation costs, and transportation is not shown as a separate group within this. Transportation, our yellow bus services would be broken amongst all of these categories. But transportation is another one where it's going to be dependent upon where the students live in relation to the school. Because we don't transport within 1 mile of the school. And that's the students that do ride generate funding. So those are some of the reasons that make it difficult for me. But I kind of probably work a little bit more deeply with the numbers and try to make certain ends meet. Whereas if you were to compare districts across the state, that would probably be more useful, or across multiple states. Might be a useful comparison.
I would jump in on a couple more thoughts on the average. I think the average is fine, provided that you're comparing districts of similar size. And I think an example would be Blaine, Ferndale. With 7,000 students, Ferndale has some economies that they can realize. For example, they have one superintendent, Blaine has one superintendent. So they have one transportation director, Blaine has one transportation director. So it distorts the average a little bit, because in a smaller district, there's going to be some cost variables that factor into that food service department, for example, or granted, it would need more frontline workers, but the establishment of the department, the special education department, entities within the district like a school psychologist that serves a certain program level isn't necessarily a direct correlation to the number of kids that you have. So there are some cost variables that factor into it that make the case-by-case basis comparison maybe not as straight line as some.
I think the way you got everything kind of centered, everything's there.
Right.
It's not the biggest school.
Right. And I think the other factor is it costs us money to offer programs that support college credit access at the high school level. The flip side of that is that some of you may be familiar with Running Start, which is a program that's probably been in place for close to 2 decades, where kids can leave our campus and go to Wacom or ETC as juniors or seniors, and the dollars follow those kids. The district retains about 5% of the state apportionment as a fiscal cost, management cost, flow-through cost. But we want those kids to stay on the campus because they add enrollment to a classroom where you've already paid for a teacher. So there's a lot of moving parts in the funding and expenditure structure to put in a distort a little bit the value comparing that number, but your number's accurate. You know, just if you look at overall expenditure level divided by the number of students that you count, it's going to be in that range. That's going to fluctuate from district to district, not necessarily because there's more efficiency in the way they strive to run the program. There's just greater efficiency because you get this variance. And quite frankly, that's part of what the state's doing to schools and communities right now, is trying to level the playing field. When they come in and leverage 81 cents per thousand, which is probably a little higher in Washington County because of property valuations, you know, that dollar amount that the state's applied to collect dollars to support schools statewide, it's going to be, the rate's going to be slightly different from county to county. But the target number was 81 cents per thousand. When they collect those dollars, that doesn't mean that the Blaine School District's going to see a full level back, because a district like Blaine compared to Hoquiam or high poverty, very much residential, tax dependent, economically deprived district where property valuations are lower as a result of the economy, is struggling disproportionately to fund schools compared to a Bellingham, for example, or even a Blaine, for example. So the state's attempting to do is just that level the playing field and make equity of school resources more consistent across the state. So there's a little bit of a Peter Paul principle in this state piece that says, let's, you know, rather than have a district out there that can generate more dollars through a local levy and have a lower tax rate for their taxpayers, some people don't think that's fair, right? Because we want our kids in Hoquiam or Yakima or you know, Walla Walla, wherever, we want them to have the same access to resources. So that's a big part of what the state's trying to do with this piece. One of the things, and Amber can get into the numbers at the bottom of the page, but one of the things that they've done then reciprocally is said, okay, we're going to push more money towards you, but we're also going to lower your maintenance and operations capacity. And for Blaine, our voters approved for 2019 about $7.3 million of maintenance and operation funding, and the state's now going to lower that by $1.8 million. So they're going to cap that off at about $5.5 million. And that's why you'll see here on this other chart that Andrew can explain probably better than I can, this dip in the maintenance and operation levy tax rate in 2019. Because the state's saying, okay, we're going to push more money towards you. And for some districts, that will be all new money, essentially. But for those that have been able to run a higher levy and kind of support it locally, that levy capacity, they call it the levy lid, is going to come down. So that we're going to lose we'll gain some from the state, we're going to lose about $1.8 million locally in funding that's supporting the programs, that some of which will backfill now with state dollars to support. So it's a convoluted picture in public education in the state of Washington right now. But we just think of it as the general premise behind what the state's attempting to do is make educational opportunity tied to resources more equitable across the state. And it's because it certainly hasn't been equitable, particularly in economically deprived areas that can't generate tax revenue somewhere. So, I'm Amber, speak to this chart quickly, and then we can answer other questions about it.
Sure. So the chart on the bottom, in the left column, if you're looking at it, the 2018 column, I'm showing what school-related types of property taxes we're paying in 2018 per 1,000. So the lightest color there is the school district bonds, Blaine School District bonds at 96 cents. I'm expecting that one to probably be 94 cents per thousand in 2019. But it's pretty flat. We're collecting $3.7 million a year for the next several years, so that will be flat. Above that, the next darker color is the Washington State School Tax. $3.20 per thousand is the number I found on the assessor's tax book and matched up to the bill I received. So $3.20. For this one, the state legislators felt that the revenue forecasts for the state were strong enough that this was too much, and they wanted to roll back in 2019. They intend to roll off 30 cents. I think that translates to more for Whatcom County because of the way our assessor values property at less than the market value, but at least 30-cent difference. So for next year in 2019, I'm using a $2.90 estimate. I'm just taking off 30 cents. Above that is the Blaine School District Maintenance and Operations Levy, $1.85 per thousand in 2018. The state's requiring the formulas that calculate that levy authority for us to roll back. So we will be collecting less in 2019. I have estimated $1.39 for that number. The state needs to give us a final number to work with before I can have more certainty of what we will collect in 2019. But the estimates right now look like it would turn out to be $1.39 per thousand. I show in the darkest color is the proposed technology and capital levy at 51 cents per thousand. That is not going to, that's a dollar amount per year of $2 million, which means if properties in the district go up in value, then the rate will reduce. The others, like I mentioned before, the bond, we collect a certain dollar amount, so that rate may not stay fixed over time if we have more property in the district. However, the state school tax usually stays fixed at a rate per thousand, so that could, that won't change. I wouldn't expect that to change if more property is built. And then the M&O levy, I need final word to see if we fall into one of two rules. We either collect $2,500 per pupil or $1.50 per thousand property value. The lesser of the two numbers. So I'm estimating that if the technology and capital levy passes, the school-related taxes would go down 25 cents. And if it didn't pass, it would go down 76 cents per thousand.
I'm now officially confused.
Right.
Because we've all been under the impression that there's going to be this huge increase in property taxes to cover the state, the mandated, Supreme Court mandated increase in funding for education.
Oh, that was in 2018.
So that's in the 2018 numbers that are here?
Yes.
Okay.
So for some, I think in part because a school's fiscal year is different from a calendar year. The state began collecting in 2018, but knew that we needed to fund our operations in the 17-18 school year, so they let us hold on to our levy capacity until 2019.
Until the money came in. Okay, I understand.
Right.
Thank you. I'm a little confused.
Sure.
Right. And if you were watching the headlines along early March, when the new revenue forecast came out, it jumped up considerably, and that's when many of our legislators rapidly looked at some level of reduction in the state tax level, and that's where this 30-cent piece comes in that could be, as Amber alluded to, just a little bit higher in Washington County because of the assessor excessive property, but it'll be right in that range. And of course, I think we've all been at this property taxpayer thing long enough to know that any formula is only good through the next year projected, and then it's difficult to know what's coming, right? You see this fluctuation in revenue forecasts in the state of Washington that's been wildly up and down over the last decade or so since the recession. So we're not able to project out what the state's going to do beyond 2019. That's just, I mean, we can allude to the fact that in the last 10 years, we have tried really hard in the Blaine School District, the board has, to time tax measures to keep the line as relatively constant, the line that we control, but we don't control all these other lines. You know, one of the questions that I was asked at the city office last week was, you know, is it maybe time for some of the public entities to start getting together and considering staging some of these measures so that they're not all coming into play at once? And that's certainly a viable question. I'm sure that it feels particularly this year. I own 2 pieces of property in Whatcom County and saw the same things all of you saw, and sticker shock definitely was the first reaction. So we understand that there's compounding variables, and certainly the state school tax. When I read that on there, I think, well, that's for schools, and so is this that we do locally. So how does all of that combine? Unfortunately, as I alluded to earlier, Blaine's not going to be, Blaine School District, your school district is not going to be the major windfall recipient, if you will, of this adjustment at the state level because of the drop then in the tax, which helps our taxpayers, but it creates some challenges in the revenue stream.
Maybe I'm just looking at what you're saying. The state tax that we've all been right now paying.
Right.
You're saying you're going to lose actually like $1.8 million of what you were expecting in funding is going somewhere else in the state to subsidize other state schools' funding.
Sort of
reading that right?
Sort of. Let me take a little different run at this. So with that state tax, with that 81 cents per thousand, which increases this amount to $3.20, because there already was tax being collected by the state of Washington to support. When they send dollars out to schools based on the number of students you have, that comes from a state-generated tax of your property. Mm-hmm. So in part, I mean, there are other sources for that revenue, but that's a major one. So they, in an effort to fully fund the threshold that they've set for schools to say this is what the fully funded level is, districts can go above that with local dollars, or they can bring it to come to that fully funded level. For some districts means they're going to come up from a lower level to that level. And I mentioned a few examples of those districts and more economically deprived areas. So this $3.29, which is an 81 cent increase, if you average it across the state, is an effort to push more resources more consistently from the state to cover the cost of basic education, whatever that baseline is. In the Blaine School District, our voters approved a 4-year maintenance and operations levy to supplement what goes on in the classroom, hire more teachers, hire more aides, hire more bus drivers, because the state doesn't cover all of those. So, but the levy that was passed, the 4-year levy in 2016 was passed, was targeted in 2019 to collect $7.3 million. What the state is saying is, we're levying tax against your taxpayers, and we're going to push more money out to your Blaine School District. We're going to bring that 7.2 down to approximately 5.5, 5.6, about $1.7, $1.8 million less. So it's not this the new tax you're paying, it's the tax you've been paying that will come down. The maintenance and operations, the Blaine School District tax will come down, but so will the revenue available to us. So if the state's going to give us $4 million more a year, by 2019, locally we're going to get $2 million or $1.8 million less per year. So that's not true in every single school district. It depends on where you are on that continuum as a school district. Are you below the state level, or have you been operating above that threshold and able to provide programs for kids that other school districts haven't been able to do? So that's where the drop in revenue comes. For the Blaine School District, it ultimately will be less of a gain than it would have been for another district that isn't in a position where they have to lower their levy like the Blaine School District has to do. It's complicated. I understand that it's difficult to explain all these moving parts.
Is there a net gain for one?
We'll have more revenues next year than we do this year, which is good, because this year we have more expenditures than we have revenues. So you have to, correct that issue.
The school board targets a 6% fund balance as the minimum fund balance for a rainy day fund, if you will. And this may be the first year that we drop slightly below that level. As I alluded to earlier, we've seen between last year and this year, we've seen approximately a 10% increase in expenditures, and we average about 7%
We have.
over the last 5 years, 7 years, somewhere in that time frame. So, some of that's labor costs. When the state system says, okay, we're raising the district's contribution to employee retirement rates, healthcare costs. The reality is right at 85%, and you can see that that's pretty much the average for all school districts in Washington County, are labor-related costs. And employees are on salary steps and experience steps. Amber alluded to that earlier. So some of that movement adds to the expenditure, if you will. And then just in general, the cost of doing business. One thing about the economy is it sort of settles in a little more healthy rate. I think what we've experienced with our capital projects, for the best example, we had estimates in that $45 million bond issue that were right on in the first year, and then as the economy started kicking in and construction started back in, those costs were going up pretty significantly. So, kind of a catch-22, right? When you're in a recession, things flatten out, investments flatten out too, but as the economy starts to kick back, you start to see inflation kicking in again, and we've experienced some of that.
Your tax base also improves, which helps the individual taxpayers.
Right.
And during this period of time, I think we've seen a lot of changes in what the state is requiring schools to do. So in the last 5 years, and Ron was referencing our expenditure growth rates, we've also had the requirement to provide a full-time kindergarten program instead of half-time, to lower class sizes, to bring in an entirely new curriculum and state standards for student testing, a new teacher and principal evaluation program. And so we've had a number of curriculum adoptions to support the change in the curriculum requirements. Added what we call Chromebooks. They're kind of like computers, but very kind of limited in what they can do for testing, because now we are on an online testing program. And none of it's cheap when you're providing that for 2,200 students in a short testing window, and then training them throughout the year on some of the new requirements. So we have changed, our operations and requirements have changed, and so we've been evolving and adding more staff to accommodate some of those changes, as well as the materials that go with it.
Are the students aware of how much is being spent on their own education? And do they know where it's coming from? Do they know that the property taxes are paying, that they're paying? Do they know how much the community is actually investing in their education? And if so, if not, do they feel any sense of, I don't know if the word's do they feel that sense? And, we're kind of committed to their education. Do they feel committed to their community? I guess are they thinking that, if these guys got to go out and work and make this money, and it's got to go to them, and then, so somehow the community has to get regenerated somehow, and
So that's a really broad civics-related question. It's a wonderful question. So I'm probably not going to do it justice, but I would say that I believe after a dozen years in the New York School District that I have seen a tremendous number of students are really committed to taking advantage of their educational opportunities. So I'll give you an example. Last year, we spent some dollars, but we added a program to the high school called Biomed. And basically it takes the technical program, it would have been, when I was in school, it would have been called vocational ed. It's now called career and technical education, but it takes a technical program and combines it with a core program, biology, and gives kids an opportunity for more technology-driven, hands-on, project-based learning of science, lab-based science. So that doesn't really do it justice, but I won't go into greater depth than that. We've had 95 kids enroll in that program the first semester. That's a phenomenal number. We had to open 3 sections of the program to support that. And now those kids are lined up to go into a similar program for human body systems, anatomy, and physiology. Next year, we'll also start a program called Engineering 1 that allows kids to earn their first algebra credit through an engineering program, project-based program as well. So kids are demonstrating a really, really high level of interest in those programs. They are inexpensive programs because they involve equipment that Chromebooks or tablets aren't going to support those programs. There's a higher level of technology need within those programs. So your new high school has a significant amount of career technical education space where kids can, our hope is that ultimately kids will be enrolling into your manufacturing programs. We have shops that are expansive, equipment that's online to be purchased to support those shops, and it really is about, for those kids, projecting out, not just, there will be some who will go to four-year universities, but we want to provide opportunity to kids to do other things with a technical skill that they can learn at the high school level. So, from a roundabout answer to your question, I think those kids understand that they're going to be part of something that's really special, and they do understand it's supported by their community. Do they go to the depth of thinking about how hard you work to pay for that? That's a great question, and one that I think we could probably do a better job at having them become more actively involved in learning about where these resources come from.
Well, let me add to what your comments are to Judson. And part of the question, part of the answer would be some of the seniors from Blaine High School are currently and have for the past 3 or 4 years invested time and effort for our food bank here on the point. We currently have one student who is a senior. He's a senior, right? And he's putting in an average of about 3 hours a week with us. So he's giving back to us at the same time.
What's the name of that program? Would the seniors do
I
community
don't know, I've got the paperwork, and Carl will give it to you later.
outreach?
They have a senior project they completed.
Senior community project?
Right, it has a community project link to it that all seniors have to complete. Their senior presentation involves not only articulation of what their long-term plan is for their employment or education or both, but also includes a layer of commitment to engaging in volunteer work at the community level. That's a broad community for Blaine students because some of them are interested in trades or opportunities that they have to go to Bellingham to be part of, but others, as Henry's referenced, are engaging in
Judson. The kid who's doing the food bank, he's also one of the counselors for the kids' summer camp, so he's giving back that way too. He's very involved in the community.
Do they usually pick their own thing, or do organizations come to them and come to the school and pitch
Generally,
their
they pick their own
project?
They do generally pick their own project here. We want them to do something that's of both personal and potential vocational interest to them. So they take that part of it very seriously, and then they have an opportunity. Some of you can be involved in that. In May, they come together and do presentations to community members on what they've done and how that's impacted their next steps in their education. Yes?
I worked with a young man who graduated Blaine a couple of years back, and he wanted to get into mechanics. And I had a hobby shop of my own working on classic vehicles. He brought his vehicle around, and we had to spend X amount of hours with him working hands-on towards putting time in and writing up his presentation for his senior project. So he was going towards a trade. The other young gentleman that's being spoken about was helping out in various ways in the community. It's very broad and varied. It all depends on what they choose to do their senior projects on, correct?
Right.
Is there insurance that covers that for the student?
The district's insurance overall, since it's a student project. Would be a good question to think about some of the details, because a lot of it's happening,
Even the food
homework
bank.
at home.
Steve,
so I'm
I'll
not
respond
actually
to
sure
your
about
question when they're ready.
Okay, but I was gonna say, like the food bank, even that you could wrench your back out, and Kenny's, you can drop something heavy on your foot, so even benign things, the student could hurt themselves. That's a concern for those of us that would like to get some seniors involved in things we do. Other things. Okay.
Yes.
So your projections for 2019 show the property taxes went down 2,000, but the 27.6 million in expenditures, is that going up, going down, staying the same for 2019?
For 2019, we have seen growth in expenditures over the last several years. Typically, there is just increases in the cost of maintaining what we're already doing. We have some areas of inflation that we experience. We'll see higher costs for insurance premiums, rates for our software program, our overall accounting software program. I don't believe for next year we'll see much change in employee benefit rate. We do not know the cost of labor next year, though. The state has changed what teachers need to be paid in all of their McCleary full funding formulas, so that has yet to be determined.
So you don't have a cost budget yet for 2019?
No, that will be adopted, or there's a public hearing and adoption scheduled for the end of August. There will be a draft of that budget available by July 10th. So we'll have a better idea of what that will look like by July. We are going to be considering some changes for next year in the area of students' safety measures. And then we also would need to look at some of our class sizes and caseloads. Sometimes we have requirements where we need to add a staff member to reduce the class size to a certain level, or if it's a specialist that has students with certain needs, there's a caseload limit. Even our nurses are limited to the number of students they can serve as a ratio overall. So yes, I would see costs increasing from the current year into the next year.
I would just reinforce, sorry, in the spirit of full disclosure, I said this earlier, but it might have been missed, because we shared a lot of detail tonight, that this number is the 16-17 program year number, and that for 17-18, it went up to roughly $30 million, which was close to a 10% increase. As I alluded to, the average over the last 5 or 6 years has been in the 7% range. We saw some escalation of that last year for a variety of, a little higher level of that for a variety of reasons. Amber's mentioned some of those. I'll just touch on the school safety issue. Since Parkland, there's probably been no single issue, and understandably so, that's dominated more of our time, and we have additional meetings with Alpho and Gardette and our local police department in Blaine, so local county sheriff and Blaine Police Department and county emergency management. There's just a lot of options and expectations around what we do to make schools safer for kids, and all of those, and staff and public, and all of those have resources attached to them in some ways. So as we start planning budget for next year, one of the things that we have to consider will be, whether it's door hardening issues, like auto lock systems on doors on all of our schools, whether it's an issue of school resource officer presence on campus. All of those things are in discussion now, and not just with our emergency management folks and our law enforcement folks, but obviously also with our school board. It's just, that's not unique to the Blaine School District, and you see that happening throughout the county. So many of those will be local cost variables that will push on our ability to do other things that you'd like to be doing as well. So let me I'm not going to read all this next document to you. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed your hand.
That's okay.
My apologies.
So if this bar goes down from 2018 to 2019 and the expenditures go up, I'm assuming that means there's a gap somewhere, right? Or you expect, are there going to be a lot of new homes built, or what makes up this? If everybody's paying less, but you need more money, how does that work? What are the ways that you fund that gap?
I don't have the final state apportionment allocation yet. There are only preliminary numbers, but I'm expecting that the state funding of the McCleary will cover the expenditure increases. So it comes from what the state is already starting to collect, and then whatever their revenue forecast was would be the rest of it. Because they had a better revenue outlook for their budget cycle, just from sales taxes and all the other types of taxes they collect, other than this property tax. Or maybe in addition, property value growth. So
here's basically, just in terms of even more succinct answer to your question, we met with our administrative team, our principals yesterday, and what we said to them, as Amber's alluded to here, expenditure exceeded revenue in the current year, so we drew down to about 6%, or just a little below 6% in the fund balance. So we have to account for that next year, so if you look at that, it's roughly $900,000. And then if you look at other, if you use the 7% number, which has kind of been our average increase per year to accommodate all of those other variables which cost that, that's going to be on a $30 million budget. That's going to be about $2.1 million. So now you're right about $3 million of increase back to that $3 million number, which is about what it was last year. So if we project for that, we think in 2019, the state's allocation, as Amber alluded to, their increased allocations will cover that. But then we have this other long list of things that we're going to have to decide. What we're going to do is the board going to draw down the reserve a bit more so that we can harden doors and have SRO officers and do evacuation training at a more intricate level with the involvement. One of the proposals the county's making, Sheriff's Department and Emergency Management, is that school districts, each out of the 7 in Whatcom County, kick in on hiring 3 county-level officers, trainers that help school districts with this planning process and campus security process. So, in all honesty, that's going to be a major debate because for me it comes back to, would we rather have control of the dollars locally for our own school district? When you start putting dollars into a generalized pot, if you will, container of resources, then you lose some control over what you can do with those dollars because you've got lots of different entities, in this case 7 different school districts pulling on the resource. So those are some of the things above. It's just about, do we push 7%, make up the gap we couldn't pay for last year, look at the state revenue for this next year, we think we'll be okay. Keep in mind that of that $1.6 to $1.8 million of local maintenance operation levy that's been approved, that's a calendar year amount of money, that's a 2019 amount of money, so half of it's in next school year and then the other half of it will come in the following school year. So we'll still have a bit of levy capacity left in 2018-19. That makes sense because it'll take 2 school years for that to be fully reduced. So again, lots of different pieces of motion with that.
Given that personnel is 85 to 84%, how are your labor management relations?
Our labor management relations have been very good at Blaine. I think that that we're going to be pushed a bit just as a result of everywhere, not just in Blaine, but as a result of this new influx of state dollars that, if you've been reading the papers and the headlines, more than one person said to me last Thursday at the breakfast that, boy, they're reading that the threshold for wages for teachers, which is probably overdue in many ways. So I'm not discrediting it, but it's going to result in some expectations of adjustment. So that's all part of, we're a collective bargaining entity, and the process is always a complex one, but our relations, we've been really fortunate in Blaine to work with labor groups that are very much dedicated to the system that understand that there has to be a balance if we're going to make this work for everybody, and most importantly for kids. So, but we've looked ahead to labor negotiations this summer. I thought this could be one of the more complex years for us, just by the nature of the perception of workforce coming in from the state.
There was an article recently that was, I don't know if it was in our paper or Blaine paper, that talked about the rate of depression of school kids, suicidal thoughts, depression. Have you guys talked much about getting to the root of the problem of these power plant type events and how to get students not wanting to do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you an example. This could almost be a whole separate meeting to talk about the Healthy Youth Survey and some of the things we're learning about our broader school community, not just specifically, but our overall community, because all kids representing Point Roberts, Blaine, Birch Bay, all participate, not just in program, but in those surveys. So one of the things that we've looked at going into this year is to actually bring a part-time mental health counselor on campus that could then establish a more comprehensive network out to the community, to community agencies that provide those services. So I'll just give you a sort of rough general number that the school district was involved a recent prior year, at the middle school level with providing networking services for maybe 5 students and their families. That number has risen to over 20 students and their families as a result of having someone on campus that's responsible for actually coordinating those connections. So that's been a really huge step forward to get those services available to families. And again, the school district's not paying for all of those services. They're accessed through a variety of resources. It's just making the connections to get those kids help and assistance as early on as possible. So we saw a pretty significant jump in the level of service that was made available as a result of bringing a half-time person in to the school district to sort of serve as the gatekeeper, the controller, if you will, of getting kids out quicker and families out quicker to available services. So that's an example. That kind of falls back into the arena of what does costs look like for next year, because of course if you've had that success with somebody 4 hours a day on campus in making those connections for kids and families early, then could we do even a better job of it if we had a full-time person available to be helping with those linkages. So these are what I just handed out, and again, I know that time's running on here, but as a Q&A piece, I mean, these are things, there's a lot of information here, you can take this with you, and some of it I hope will be helpful. We've covered some of this. I just think that one of the things you should be aware of is that this is the first time that the Blaine School District has ever run a capital levy. And so primarily in the past, it's either been a bond issue for major capital works, like we wait until it's absolutely essential. And we also try to wait until the last one you approved has been paid off. That was the staging last time with the bonds. And so sometimes it takes time to get there. And that was the case with the Blaine, what I call the Blaine High School bond, because the lion's share of it was to replace a building that was really had reached its maximum level of productivity. So that $45 million bond that you approved in 2015 is primarily now poised to balance of it to support the completion of the Blaine High School project that will be done in a year and a half or in the summer of 2019. Yeah, absolutely.
These were prepared prior to the state rolling back its own tax. So if you were looking at the tax chart, this is what we thought it would be like up until
Yet the 30
March
cents hadn't been
2020.
rolled back. So that's why there's not a dip down in that 2019, like there is in the document that aggregate here. So with the 30% rollback, that column comes down. So there are bond issues. In my tenure here, we passed 2. We passed a $4 million bond to build a science building on a high school campus. Passed that in 2013. And then the $45 million bond that added classrooms at Blaine Primary School so we could offer all day kindergarten, and then the high school project is the major project with that. And if it wasn't bonds, then it was a 4-year maintenance and operation levy, and basically, those levies will provide some support to ongoing maintenance. They're not poised to provide the level of support that we need to complete some of these projects. So the technology and capital levy is a 6-year measure. It collects $2 million a year. There's a lot of information on the Blaine School District website on how it will be spent, how the projects are staged, what the cost projections are for the projects. What we've tried to do is account for inflationary factors for the projects that won't be done in the first or second or third year. So they're necessary funds because projects reach a magnitude that's too steep for, again, for the general fund to be supporting. So the other information that we've provided in here are what happens if the measure doesn't pass, the district stadium piece. We were just about a year behind the curve on maximizing that big structure. And virtually every school district in Whatcom County, part of the problem was they're all building schools at the same time. Meridian had just finished. Lemon was building to Nooksack to Blaine, in addition to the primary and rebuilding the high school. Bellingham always has projects in motion, and so they were pulling on the contractor inventory people, and particularly the subcontractor inventory. So there's some information in here about why we had to go back out for the stadium piece. And if you're familiar with the Blaine campus, the stadium is beyond antiquated. We can sit in it safely, but it is just in really poor condition and needs to be replaced. In order to do that, in the first year, you can see reference in here to non-voted debt, which means that we're allowed to go out and leverage the funding immediately for that stadium piece if this passes, because part of the advantage to that is we have a contractor on site right now. And while it would have to be bid, there's probably a very tactical advantage to having the contractor on site to be able to bid on that project. And if they submit the low bid, then they can get that completed before they leave the site. So we want to move forward with that. That non-voted debt would be paid back by proceeds from the capital levy. The Birch Bay property piece is there with an explanation. I can go to that in greater depth if you have questions. And also work on just athletic fields, PE fields that needs to be done. And then technology upgrades are listed here as well. So there's a fair amount of information here, probably more than some of you are interested in, but we're really trying to be as transparent as possible about the details of all of this, why it's needed. Do you have another question? Yes.
Now, you mentioned that you're combining sort of algebra and engineering, for example.
Right.
Okay, that's really great. And then you mentioned that the low end of the tablets, which is, I know we can go on the website and get more information. Are there actual programming courses now offered in Blaine?
Computer programming courses?
Yeah, and does that reflect in the kind of technology you have to buy, which it should?
Yeah, in terms of actually programming of computers, would probably a qualified no to that, at least at our level right now. But as we get into, this engineering piece will be new for us, so we have some things to learn about it. So there could very well be some factor into that.
Mm-hmm.
That equipment, when we make reference to technology equipment, we've also made reference in these documents to CTE related needs, career technical education related needs. So you can buy a tablet or a Chromebook for $250 in the last 5 years, and it's a great economy for much of what kids need to use that for on a Google platform. But that's not going to support an engineering lab or a robotics lab or some of that preliminary investment, upfront investment is included in the bond issue that passed. So there's an equipment and materials budget embedded in that bond issue.
Well, one reason I'm asking is a specific thing to say, which is that Apple's doing very well with the open source Swift language, which is a derivative of their main language that they use to build apps for phones and tablets and computers. And it's phenomenal, and it's easy. And they made it so that it isn't totally dry. You're just typing text and you see a few numbers come out. You're actually typing some text and you see pictures come up. And, it's very rewarding. And it runs on pretty much every kind of computer. It does not necessarily run on a Chromebook.
Right.
Okay.
There's a lot of things that won't run in those Chromebooks
Yeah.
that are absolutely
Right, but it can run on a pretty low.
Which, by the way, going back to biomed, our technology outlay for computers for that program is closer to $50,000 rather than just going out and buying Chromebooks.
Yeah.
In that context. So yeah, there's a lot of equipment needs to be in that context.
I'm sure this is consistent with state law, but I'm just curious, why is capital levy, does it need only 50% voter approval? Doesn't the maintenance operations levy require super majority?
No, maintenance and operations is 50%. Bonds, capital bonds are
For sure.
higher. Yeah, and they tend to be at a much higher level. Ferndale just released their summary report. It's quite extensive on the bond issue. They're going to go back after their high school and be in excess of $100 million, which is not uncommon for larger school districts. So.
The other question, is there anything planned for use of the money in the capital levy, that couldn't have been used under maintenance operation had the maintenance operation levy been bigger?
We couldn't make it bigger. It was at the cap, so we weren't able to make it larger.
So this is sort of like asking for second maintenance and operations in a sense.
Yeah, to some degree, accepting that the majority of that maintenance and operations levy is kind of a misnomer, and we've been in business for 35 years. You see this progression, if you will, whereas at the onset, M&O, maintenance and operations levies, we're paying for many of these types of things. Now they're paying for extra teachers, curriculum, all of which is very much appropriate, but it just doesn't leave dollars for capital improvements.
There's one legal piece. I can't use the general fund to build a stadium, and I can't transfer M&O dollars to the capital projects fund to build the stadium. Now, there's kind of a little, shifty thing there because I could request apportionment dollars from the state be transferred to the capital projects. Exactly. But in fact, that could be, I'm not sure that that's been impacted by the latest changes from the state, but that's one little technicality.
Last question for me. Emergency preparedness, so all these buildings are getting kind of fixed up. A, are they good? Are they pretty resilient? Are they pretty strong for disasters? And also, can the buildings be used by the communities as shelters and so on? Like specifically here in Point Roberts, as well as Blaine.
So absolutely,
we have an emergency preparedness group.
They can use it as shelter. There's an affirmative yes to that, a definite yes to that. In terms of hardening a school, there's a lot of variables involved. Part of the urgency early on, all the way back in 2008, to get a bond approved for Blaine High School was about 54 entrances, and just the accessibility on the truck route and access to the school campus that really has been quite unsecured, if you will. I mean, we can do drills, we can drill to lock down, we can, our law enforcement entities, county, state patrol, city of Blaine, border patrol, homeland security, they do shooter response drills in our schools consistently. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have 2,500 people coming and going every and students and teachers every day, and in and out on a regular basis, and moving from buildings to gymnasiums, that those buildings are secure, you know, they're not impenetrable, if you will. I mean, there are certain times during the day, even districts, I'm familiar with one this week that's retrofitting all of their elementary schools to a camera lockdown, buzz-in feature. And many districts will do that, and we will have that feature on the front door of Blaine High School and Blaine High School complete. So you go to those programs, but what you see is that they have to unlock that door at arrival time because you have 300 parents coming with their kids to school, especially if you're in a walking area. So I would argue that kind of defeats the purpose to some degree, but that's the nature of the school. I go to school with my kid in the morning, I want to walk into the classroom because I want to talk to their teacher. So there's a lot of different, you know, our school board this month in a week and a half will hear an update on what's going to cost to put those electronic blocking systems on the front door at the Point Roberts Primary School, on the front door at Blaine Middle School, on the front door at Blaine Elementary School. When we did the primary school edition, we installed, you know, we retrofitted the main doors with an electronic locking system. So, yeah, I mean, we are certainly getting better at it. Some would walk up to the facade of our cafeteria. Most of our students will be coming in and out, and from ground, the two-story ceiling is glass. It's all glass. So does that make a building more secure? Probably not. So there's that balance of expectation for aesthetics and security, and so your question's dominating my professional life over the last 2 months, and I don't really mean that humorously. I just need to say that there are more discussions going on around this very important issue than you could probably imagine with respect to schools.
For natural disasters, they're still good for shelters and.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, to continue what Judson is discussing now, you and I and two other individuals, that is Annette Ham and Virginia Lester, had a meeting or two at the primary school here well over a year ago. We discussed emergency preparedness, and we didn't reach any conclusions. And that tells me that, and she's out of town right now, and Virginia's at a fire department meeting, so she can't be with us tonight. We didn't seem to resolve and or even address the major issues. Can the four of us sit down in the next month or so, either at your office or at the primary school, and talk about some of these things so we can resolve it? The cost to the Blaine School District will be absolutely minimal. It will be maybe 1/100th of 1% of what your expenditures were in 2016-17. We need to have this discussion so we can resolve that. One segment, also we want to talk about, I don't know whether you've talked to Boyd, what's Boyd's first name? CERT. We want to talk about CERT for...
It's not Boyd anymore. Oh, it's Gardner.
In any event, there is a program that's available for teenagers at minimal cost so they can help prepare not only themselves, but their families for in case of emergencies, which you're aware of, certainly aware of. So we need to address these issues, we need to resolve them. We have one more issue too, which we could talk about, not now because it doesn't concern all of us here. It does concern the primary school here, with Jesse, Tracy, with Pang and some of the other volunteers.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll get on the schedule. I can come up.
Okay.
Absolutely, we'll be here.
Okay, good.
Back to the bond issue. The ballots are out. I noticed from my perspective and pleasure, that not a single person put in an anti-position. There was no con statement, only a pro statement.
And we are, we're required to solicit
Yes.
upon position, you know that,
Yes.
right? So, okay, yeah. And we have to do that in 3 different ways, so I think it gets more and more, and
Nobody had a similar issue.
we're burned dogged pretty heavily by the elections office to make sure that we met that
Yeah,
requirement.
I understand. I just thought it was interesting that no one is against it. I'm sure some people will vote against it.
No, we understand that.
You have no votes every time.
I do actually.
50% is a lot more doable than 60%, that's for sure. More questions?
Not regarding the bond, but if we could move on, add other questions. I grew up in Point Roberts and went to Blaine School, graduated in '88. Back then they had a turnout bus. Point Roberts hasn't had a turnout bus for the longest time. I've got a son that's turning 13 this year. Is there going to be any chance of a turnout bus in the future? Again, for Point Roberts.
It's a great question. It comes up relatively frequently. So let me just give you some history, and I don't have the definitive answer. Is there a chance for it? I say, yeah, there's always a chance for it. Participation level is a significant driver, and I just want to give you a little history piece in that. The elimination of turnout buses district-wide occurred just before I arrived, so it's one thing that you have to totally own, but I've been engaged in a lot of discussions. Since I was actually engaged in a discussion at the Port of Bellingham level about a turnout ferry, if you will, or boat. So there have been a lot of different discussions on how we might get kids back and forth to Point Roberts over the years. When we go back to like 2004, in that school year, roughly, the turnout buses were eliminated everywhere by Point Roberts. And then statistics were kept on the number of, the way our contract works with our drivers, our bus drivers, if we commit to a run, then we're committed to that run, whether they have to make the run or not. And the numbers were dramatically low for that next year where the district maintained, and that was just before I got here, maintained that. So the following year, the bus was stopped. There were certain nights where nobody rode that at all. And it gets a little bit tricky because you have middle school athletics ending at 4:30 and high school athletics ending at 5:30. And some high school athletics, the girls and boys basketball, for example, share the gym. So the main gym, the varsity gym, they call it. And so one group will take the early shift and the other the late shift. Drama production, as I mentioned earlier, has become very, very high participation level. Its hours are completely different than that. So it's certainly something that we could survey, in anticipation of the future year to see where the interest levels reside. But it has to be a consistent level of participation
Of
use in order to support it.
Yeah.
So when WTA stopped coming up here, there's been a variety of dialogue points. Henry would say, yeah, they're having about emergency preparedness too. And they've never really gone as far tangibly as they need to go. And that may be true of, turnout bus as well, but maybe we need to dive a little bit deeper into it. Conceptually, I think there's agreement that the problem is where's the consistency there. So another mental note, an issue that we can take a look at here.
Thank you.
Sure.
On one other note, when I was in Blaine High School, there was great wood shop, auto shop, metal shop, horticulture program. There doesn't seem to be as much towards the trade. I spent a lot of my, all but 1 hour of my senior year in the auto shop and metal shop, and ended up becoming a general contractor. is there a chance that some of those courses will be brought back?
So we have a construction trades program, and back to the concept that I was speaking of earlier, we would love to see, I don't want to speak for the instructor, but many of our CT instructors are probably either retiring this year or retiring within the next 2 or 3 years. The draw to those programs, not unlike biomed or engineering and algebra, is for kids to be able to earn articulated dual credit, if you will, credit. Our high school kids are now required to earn 24 credits. The previous requirement was 22, and the state moved it to 24. So for this year's freshmen, it's the first class that's responsible for, in essence, passing every single class and meeting the requirements for 3 lab sciences, 3 math requirements, 4 years of English, 2 years of foreign language, and it's just this really broadened scope of what they're required. So when we can combine, it's not that they earn 2 credits when they take biomed, but they get credit both in the core class biology and in an elective or CTE class with the medical field piece of it. So for construction trades, for example, there's a geometry layer in that, in the articulated area for that particular area. We have to have an instructor that can concurrently teach construction trades and geometry at the same time. So the more of that we can do, the better. The better chance that we're going to get more kids to take those courses. So, the things in a small high school that have replaced those courses that you're referencing are like CAD programs and robotics and, business programs that have a more specific emphasis on technology, training, and so you still have the kids participating. It's just how do you balance all of those things? We will have kids next year drive to the Meridian School District to take welding because the Northwest Skills and Career Academy in Mount Vernon has a satellite welding campus at Meridian.
Back when I was there, it was Bellingham Tech that was sponsoring the welding at Blaine.
Right, so we keep looking for ways to expand these programs. Our belief is the kids that we lose from high school before their senior year, many of them would stay if we could give them a hands-on, project-based, technical skill program that still allows them to meet those basic
Get the
credits. So we're working on it.
Good, thank you.
Anything else? More questions? Going once, twice? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the invite.